Good morning again, and thank you for joining us for Reviving Youth Survey Participation, Strategies for Boosting Response Rates with Sherry Kessel Schneider and Aaron Ficker. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. A few housekeeping items to share with you. If you have technical issues, please individually message me, Rebecca Buller, in the chat section, the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, please post those in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you use the chat, we can often lose the question and we want to be able to address it. So please put your questions in the Q&A section. If captions would be helpful, use your Zoom toolbar near the bottom of your screen and choose Live Transcript. AI note takers are not allowed in our training sessions. We will ask you to disengage, and if you do not, we will remove you from the Zoom room. Certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to those who attend the session in full. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Sherry Kessel Schneider is an expert in adolescent health and school health, advances knowledge of effective programs and practices to improve the physical and mental well-being of youth. And she'll be joined by Aaron Ficker, who serves as a prevention manager for the Great Lakes Prevention Technology Transfer Center. I'm going to turn things over to you all now.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rebecca, and thank you all for being here this morning. We're excited to have you as we talk about this really important topic. And so as we get started this morning, I wanted to ask everyone a question. And that question is about, sorry, about your experience with, sorry, your experience with surveys and the types of surveys that you may or may not be doing in your community. So if we could launch that poll. There we go. Do you administer a survey in your community is the question. And then there's multiple options, yes. And you can share with us what survey you use, or no, you don't. And that have you done it in the past and no longer doing a survey, or have you just not done this, the survey administration or survey promotion? Excuse me. So as those come in, this looks great. And I don't know, are we sharing the live results, Rebecca?
Not yet. Nope.
Oh, okay, great.
I'll have to end the poll.
Oh, okay, let's not do that just yet. Let's see if we can get a few more folks. Oh, looks like we have quite a few. So let's go ahead and share the results so we can just see. It looks like we have a large percentage of folks who are using, administering a youth survey. The majority, it looks like, are using a state-specific youth survey. So I know in my state, my home state of Illinois, we also use a state-specific survey that was created here for us. So it looks like we also have folks who are using a locally developed survey, and some who are using the YRBS. And the folks here who are joining us who do not or have not or are no longer, we are so glad you're here and hope you can find some great information that'll help you in the future. So with no further ado, thanks for sharing that with us. It really helps us think about how we want, how we can talk to you today about some of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Sherry. Sherry, you can get us started and share a little bit about reviving our youth survey participation.
All right, thanks, Erin. And thank you all for attending today. I've worked on surveys for decades, both state surveys and regional and local surveys. And so this is something that I've really been thinking a lot about for many years, and I'm happy to share today some of my ideas with all of you. Let me just make sure the slides are advancing. There we go. So we'll be first talking about kind of why do surveys? Why do a local survey? What is the purpose and what are some of the barriers? We'll talk about some potential solutions if you're facing any concern about the survey, if you're facing concern that might result in some low participation rates. And we will discuss the importance of communication and partnerships in order to have a successful survey administration. Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay with the slides, so excuse me if something doesn't flip right away. So I'm sure that you are all aware, if I could ask you to raise your hands, you would probably say that you have heard about increasing opposition to school surveys. Here are just a couple of headlines, but this is all just to say that it's not something that is only being talked about in schools, but is being talked about more widely in communities as well. And so these headlines probably could have come from many of your communities as well as you move forward. But let's talk now about the reasons for that. And there are a lot of reasons, methods, content, role of schools. There's many different reasons why there's opposition to the survey, and it does seem to be growing. So first of all, for years, we've heard opposition about why do you need to ask about risky behaviors? My child's not engaging in that behavior, or my child doesn't even know what that behavior is. It's too personal. It's not your business, those kinds of questions. So people are concerned about asking about risky behaviors. They also see the questions as invasive or inappropriate at times. So it's particularly important to, talk about why we're asking specific questions, and we'll get into that. But they feel that those questions are maybe not relevant. Why do schools need to know these things? It's not appropriate to talk about those at the school or in the classroom. There's also concerns about access to sensitive or private information, especially as more and more people are doing surveys online, even though there are procedures in place to protect anonymity and privacy. There are still many more doubts about that arising as more and more people switch to online surveys. There are also questions relating to that privacy, also questions around why we have to ask questions about identity and why that's necessary in order to understand issues related to health and wellness among youth. A growing concern that I've heard is around lack of trust and how data will be used. People are very concerned with who's going to have access to the data. How are they going to draw conclusions about the data? Who is going to have an influence on what is shared? So there's been a lot of lack of trust there that we've heard about. And also some of that has to do with just general questions about the role of schools in subjects that are non-academic. What is the role of schools in suicide prevention, mental health, comprehensive sex ed, all those kinds of things. So a lot of that then can kind of go along with the lack of trust as well. And lastly, too many surveys. You're not teaching enough. You are, every week there's a new survey. And that is true. People have been, schools and communities have been using a lot more surveys than they used to. Some of them are surveillance surveys, like the ones that we're talking about today, where you're just trying to understand the prevalence of different behaviors and the patterns among students. But some of those, what is perceived as a survey, because it asks you questions, are really actually screeners, where they're trying to identify specific students who are experiencing a mental health problem, let's say, and they're using those screeners to actually provide support to those individuals, and those are not anonymous. So there are two different things, and a lot of things are being administered, and they're all questions. They all look like surveys, but really understanding and being able to convey the purpose of the types of health surveys that we're talking about today is really important, and just being able to explain to people why there are different surveys and the fact that they have different purposes as well. Okay, so why do we care about opposition to these surveys? Well, response rates have been going down. And here you can see some information about the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey. The 2025 survey is actually in the field now. But in the last decade, what you can see is that the response rates have been decreasing. The overall response rate is a product of the school response rate and the student response rate. And what has influenced the lower response rates more so has been the decrease in the number of schools that are agreeing to participate. So that's the heavier dotted line in the middle that you can see there. Student response rates are also decreasing a little bit. That's the top line, but not as much as the school participation rate. And so what happens though, as these numbers go down, so does the overall participation rate. And so where it used to be, in recent years in the low 60% for the youth risk behavior survey, the most recent survey, it was 35%. So that's the product of 70% student response rate, 71%, and only about half of the schools asked to participate ended up joining the study. So why do we care about that? Well, if response rates are lower, then we have less confidence that the data that we have is really describing all of the students in your school or in your community. The higher the response rate, the more confidence you can have in that. Some data is always better than no data, but you really want to try to keep those response rates high so that you can feel comfortable with the data that you have and drawing conclusions from it and planning your action steps using it. Okay. So reducing opposition through communication and partnerships. I think that communication is really key, and it has to start long before the survey administration period and continue long after the survey administration period to really keep sort of a communication and a partnership ongoing. Because what we really want is when parents hear about the survey, we don't want them to hear about the survey when they're getting a note home saying your child is taking a survey next week. We want them to understand about the survey, so then when they get that note, they say, "Oh, this is the survey that led to more funding for mental health counselors in our school," or that helped establish a coalition for substance misuse in our schools, so or in our communities. So it's really important for people to understand why the survey is being done and to hear about those results and to have full transparency throughout the process. So as you're preparing to administer the survey, you really want to be able to answer all of the who, what, when, where, how, those kinds of questions. And so you want to talk about who will be surveyed. Is it middle school, high school, both? Where, when, and how will the survey be administered? What classes will it be administered in, over what period of time? The content of the survey, of course, what procedures are in place to ensure that it is an anonymous survey, and not just that the data is anonymous, but also that students feel as they're taking the survey that their privacy is going to be protected. Parents will also want to know who has access to the data, who's going to see it, who's going to be summarizing it. And then how are you going to share the findings? What are you going to do with this information? If you're going to take this time away from my child's class, their academic, their math, or their advisory period, or whatever it is, they want to know, what are you going to do with the findings? How are you going to share them? And what actions are going to be taken? We don't want to just do a survey for the sake of a survey. We want to know that the results of the survey are going to be used to inform work to improve adolescent health and wellness. Okay. So building parent support, as I said before, the communication is really critical. So it's really important to provide context, first of all. Why are you conducting this survey? Why does the school need this survey? We all know students have to be healthy when they come to school. They have to be, they can't be tired, and, they can't be hungry. They're going to learn best if they are healthy, if they're emotionally healthy as well. And so we want parents to understand why we're conducting a health survey in a school setting. And as I said before, how the findings will be used and communicated. We want to make sure that you provide as many specific examples as possible in terms of how data has been used in the past. Because again, then when parents will hear about the survey, they'll say, oh, this is the survey that has already had many benefits for our school, and we understand its place, and we understand that it is being used, and that actions are being taken that are going to benefit my student. So, we do want to make sure there's transparency so that parents have a way of viewing the survey if they want to in advance in order to make a decision about their child's participation. And we also want them to feel comfortable that the survey is anonymous and that there's someone that they can go to if they have any questions as they're thinking about the survey, after the survey is administered, make sure that it's clear to them who they should go to in the school. So I will say parent permission, passive permission is what is ideal. I know that there have been many changes in communities or even states around the type of parent procedure that needs to be used, and some requiring active parent permission. And I probably don't need to tell you that that obviously means a lot more work and lower response rates, because some parents will simply not see your notice, not respond. It's just really hard to get responses from everybody. But what we say is passive is ideal, but if you can't do that, you should notify, either way, you should notify parents through your school's normal means of parent communication, and you should do that multiple times so that if someone misses an email 1 week or misses the school newsletter 1 week, that they will have multiple reminders and multiple opportunities to learn about the survey. And hopefully that will also help to boost a response rate as well. We also want parents to know that there are different options for them as well as their students in terms of whether or not they participate. So parents can opt out their child and say, I don't want my child to participate in this survey, or students can explain on their own, can decide on their own whether or not they want to participate. And if they participate, they can also choose to skip certain questions if they don't understand them, if they feel any discomfort. If a student chooses to be part of the survey and then they see something that they don't want to answer, they don't have to. So that's really important. I did see a question in the chat about passive permission, and just if I could say a little bit more about that. So passive permission is when parents are notified of the survey and they're given an option to opt out their student, but the default is that their student will be invited to take the survey unless the parent in advance says that they don't want their student to do that. So, that's ideal, because that way all students, except for those opted out, have the chance themselves to decide on the survey. And generally, most students actually are really interested in the topic of the survey. They feel good that the school cares about not just their, English and math scores, but that the school cares about their health and issues that are really real and prominent for them. So that is really very important to make sure that, we give them the option if we can. So working with parents, we want to do that before, during, and after the survey administration. So you really want to strike a balance between making parents aware of the survey and aware of past results, but you don't want to alarm them because sometimes people have expectations of risk behaviors that are lower than the data shows, and sometimes their expectations are that more students are engaging in risk behaviors than they think. And so you really just want to make sure to be very straightforward, to make parents aware of the survey and be very matter of fact about it, and develop some materials that they can refer back to, a fact sheet or a letter or something like that, so that they have facts in front of them. So if they hear something from another person, another parent, let's say, that they have something to refer back to get some real information from the school, rather than being confused by what someone else might be sharing about the survey. And then, as I said before, after the survey, share the data. If you don't share the data, people will start to think that you're hiding something. So it would really be important to share the data with parents and families, as well as community partners. with educators as well, and even youth. So we'll talk about those groups a little bit more, but that's really important. And it's important to share the data, not because you want to increase parents' awareness. That's one reason, but that's not the only reason. You also, really would love to get parents to be part of the solution, to help them being engaged in discussing the data and thinking about action steps, and thinking about what their role is, in terms of addressing health issues. I'm advancing the slides and I see a blank slide. Is it looking blank to everybody else? Oh, I see. There we go. Okay. So there are a number of different, I thought they were all on one slide, but there are a number of different concerns that parents will raise that are very specific. So we're going to go through a bunch of those in order to talk about how you might want to respond to very specific questions that parents have. So the first one is, the survey is going to give my child ideas to engage in dangerous behaviors that they didn't have before. It's going to upset my child. It's very sensitive, these topics you're asking about. I'm worried about my child's privacy. Why do you ask questions about identity on the survey? And oops, we'll keep going. There we go. And sometimes parents just think, why are you wasting time on this? Why are you taking away class time from another subject? Students aren't telling the truth anyway, so what's the point? And then, of course, they're worried about their child's identity being protected. So we'll go with the first one here. The survey is going to give my child ideas to engage in dangerous behaviors. It's going to introduce them to something new that they don't know about yet. What I'd like to say to parents most of the time is, yes, your student probably does know about this, even if you don't think they do. But really, what you might want to say, honestly, is that there's no evidence that participating in a survey causes students to engage in risky behaviors. There's simply no evidence for that. Answering a question on a survey is not that influential. I mean, sometimes I say that I wish we could, I wish we could influence a student's behaviors so easily just by asking them a question. But unfortunately, or fortunately in this case, that is not possible. Kids are influenced by, who they are as individuals, the relationships they have with their peers, with the adults around them, their community as well, and even society. And all of those influences, individually and collectively, is what is influencing a student when they make a decision to engage in a risky behavior. So adolescent behavior is really complex. We probably all know that. And a survey is not going to tip the point, it's not going to be the thing that is causing harm to happen to a student. And in fact, it really often helps to start dialogues and give students an opportunity to talk to adults about things that they're concerned about. So that's another really important piece. And it shows adults that, we understand and we care about them, and we want to understand what challenges they're facing. So now a lot of parents say, well, it'd be great if you did this survey and everyone told the truth, but they don't. And so what we've actually found over the years is that the vast majority of students respond truthfully if the following three conditions are met. Their participation is voluntary. They don't feel like they're being forced or the survey is being imposed on them. They feel that their privacy is protected while they're doing the survey, so they're able to answer the questions without someone looking over their shoulder. They're able to not see their peers' responses, and that they really truly understand when you say that it's anonymous, that nobody is tracking their responses. We also want to make sure that the message is delivered, that the survey is perceived to be important. And so if students believe the survey is important, if the school and the educators are explaining to them, here's why we're doing this survey today, here's why we're taking class time and devoting it to this, if they perceive it's to be important, they will pay attention. And so, and if you also just look at data over time, I think that's another thing that you can look at to help convince yourself and others that students are responding truthfully. If students were not responding truthfully, the data would be all over the place. It wouldn't make sense. But in fact, if you look at trends over time, you see data that makes a lot of sense. And so that can also help you to feel confident that students are telling the truth. The other thing is, again, the online versus paper surveys. I wish we had a poll question about how many of you are doing online versus paper. But, there is more concern about students worrying that we can use their IP address or something like that to track their information. And so it's really important, to deliver those messages that that is not happening. No one has that intention. There's not that capability in doing the survey about this. So that is also really important to address when we talk about honesty. So now privacy. I'm worried about my child's privacy, especially with the online survey. So we just touched on that a little bit, but you want to be very clear that even though students are responding as individuals, the data is not going to be reported about individuals. The data will not be associated with anyone's identity. They're not asked questions in terms of, their name or something that could identify them specifically. But also, we want to make sure that they understand all of the procedures that are involved so that they feel confident about that. In some cases, institutional review boards are reviewing the surveys and the procedures and making sure that privacy is protected among students. And then you also want to make it very clear, again, who is using the survey, who's going to have access to that data. And you want to make sure that they understand that the access to the data will be limited, and that nobody with any intentions of trying to identify a student will be using the data in any way. Okay. So now here we're talking about upsetting topics. Parents say, why are you asking about drug use? Or why are you asking about suicide? Again, these are upsetting to students. And as I was saying before, survey questions do not induce students to participate in behaviors, but they also don't really cause students any discomfort. There may be some students who, are like, oh, why is this here? Or it might remind them of an experience that they've had. And those are real things. I'm not discounting that. But in general, I think the message that is delivered by most surveys is that people care about them and want to know what challenges they're facing. But something that we do with all of our surveys is to make a resource list available to students so that if they have a question or concern, they know who to go to and they have choices about who to go to. So in the surveys that I am involved in now, what we do is it's an online survey, and at the end of the online survey, students are brought immediately to a resource list when they submit their survey. The next thing that appears is this resource list, and the resource list is local. So it will have resources at the school, in the community, also things like hotlines. The 988 Lifeline or something like that. And so those resource lists are available. And if a student doesn't make it to the end of the survey, we also make sure that all of the teachers have those lists, that they make sure that all students know how to access those resources, including students who chose not to take the survey on that day. And what a lot of people have told me is that they're really glad that we asked for this because it's not something that they necessarily had on hand, or maybe they hadn't updated it in a long time. So it's a resource not just to help with feelings around the survey, but also more generally. Okay. So why do you ask questions about students' identities? You can ask about their behaviors, but why are you asking these more personal questions about various groups that they belong to or identify with? And so one of the big goals with surveys is that we want to look at prevalence of behaviors, but we also want to look at different patterns and understand if there are certain groups of students that are at elevated risk for physical and or emotional health problems. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to be able to give them the supports that they need. And really that we care about everybody. And so we really want to learn are there certain groups that we can do better for? And one of the ways we learn that is through surveys. Lastly, how do I know that my child's identity will be protected? So sometimes parents will say, my child is the only, X in the classroom, a member of a racial or ethnic group, or something like that. And they're worried that even though their child's name is not being requested, that someone who has access to the data would still be able to attribute risk behaviors to their child because of some of this identity information that's collected. And so something that is really important is to make it clear that you are not going to report any data for small groups of students that might allow someone to identify or to guess about who that data should be attributed to. So in the surveys that I do, typically we use the number of 20. So if there are fewer than 20 students in a particular demographic group, we do not report data for those students. I've heard a lot of different numbers, and I was actually in a webinar the other day where someone said, well, what's the magic number? And there are different opinions about that. 20 is what we go with, but you might have heard other numbers in other places. But the point is that you want to make sure that nobody sees the data and can really think or try to link it back to any individual students, or also, to sort of make unfair attributions to those students. Okay, so now that's a lot about parents. Now we'll talk about students and schools. And as I said before, students can't learn when they're not healthy. So that's always something to keep in the back of everybody's mind. So working with teachers and administrators, sometimes teachers are not always as supportive of the survey. They might not really understand the value of the survey in improving students' health. They might not feel that it's relevant to their job at the school. And so really it's important to explain the value to them, give them examples of things in their school that have been impacted by the survey that they are able to think about or observe so that they can understand the direct link between student health and their experiences in school, their academics, those kinds of things. It's important to share the survey questions with teachers and to point out specifically if there are certain questions that teachers might be really interested in. They might not be interested in certain types of behaviors, but they really might be excited to get some information about the school climate if you ask those types of questions. I know some of you ask questions from other state surveys that maybe don't ask about school climate, but then I know some of you said a lot of you said that you were doing locally developed surveys, and I've seen a lot of questions about school climate on that. So whether it's school climate or something about grades or something that you think that the teachers will find directly relevant, that's really important. We also want to make sure that the survey is as easy as possible with minimal effort required from the teachers. So making sure they have all the materials, it's taking as little of their time to plan as possible, and be flexible if you can. What we've found often works best at schools, it's not always possible, but what often works best is just to pick a period of the day and a day of the week and say, okay, everybody Tuesday, second period, the kids are taking the survey, wherever you are in the building. And so what that does is it doesn't sort of distribute the burden unevenly on, English teachers or, a certain group of teachers. Everybody is involved in the survey administration. And then it also allows, I think it brings this greater understanding too about the importance of the survey. If the school is taking all of this time out and everybody is doing this survey, the students will perceive that it is important. So you want to make sure that teachers really understand exactly what they're going to do so that they use the survey time efficiently, and also so that they're not confused or they don't make up anything about procedures or that kind of thing, that they really know exactly what they should do and they don't have questions. Of course, you want to make sure that they know about the procedures in advance so they can ask questions, but we want to make sure that on the day of the survey that they've had their questions answered and they are prepared and they have the materials available. If you're doing an online survey, you definitely want to make sure that your tech folks are available so that if a student is having a problem on the survey, you can determine quickly whether it's an isolated incident with that particular student's device or whether it's something more widespread with the connection or the connection speeds and things like that. I'm not very well versed on the technology piece, but it can be huge or it can be small. So it's really important to make sure that someone like that is available, but also someone who's available to answer questions just about the survey itself. If a student has a question that the teacher can't answer, and you want to make sure they know how to get in touch with that person. And then after the survey administration, it's really important again to share data with the school staff, but also with your partners in the community, and to invite them to be part of the the interpretation of the data and the prioritization of health topics, and in the action steps that are going to result from the data, as well as other sources of information that you have. Okay, and communicating with students. This is also really important because, as you saw before, the student participation rates are also declining. And some of that has to do with parents opting their students out, but some of that also has to do with students deciding not to take the survey. So again, you want to make sure that students understand why you're taking this time to do the survey and how you plan to use the information. That we're doing this because we want to understand them and we want to support them. We're not trying to be nosy. We're not trying to identify who's doing what, or make people feel upset or shocked or anything like that. We want them to know that we care about them, and that's why we're doing the survey. We want them to feel like their responses are going to be private. And so we want to make sure that they feel like they can do that survey without someone looking over their shoulder. And also that they understand that this is not a screener. There's just been so much confusion about that. I know I already mentioned it, but to be really clear that there are surveys that are done for different reasons. And they all look like surveys. They all have questions that you have to answer. But some of the surveys are to get general information about the student body, and some of those surveys are to identify certain students that are in need of help. And so this particular one is not going to result in someone calling you to the counselor's office or anything like that. This particular one is about patterns and trends, and it's really important for them to understand that. It's also important with screeners for them to understand what will happen with those, that can lead to some specific and personal actions that take place if there's an identified need. So it's really clear with all of these questionnaires floating around to be clear on the purpose. And again, provide examples of how student data is used to improve schools and improve communities. We've worked with a ton of communities that have really engaged students in using the data, like bringing them into conversations about, what surprises them about the data, what speaks to them, what do they think their fellow students or their parents or their teachers need to know, and then also involving them in solutions. So, for example, I was just talking to somebody in my community who, based on some data around stress in middle school and the fact that academic and social stress increases during middle school, students are now involved in a peer mentoring program where they talk to younger students about those kinds of stresses and about the transition to middle school. And they put all of that into context for them, and, help with help-seeking behaviors and stuff. So it's great. I love when I see students taking the data and saying, hey, this is a solution and I can be a part of that solution.
That's great, Sherry. And I just want to let's go back to one slide, and there are questions that I would really like to see, or that I think would be really useful for you to help us address, Sherry. So I'm just going to take just a couple minutes to address some of the things we're seeing in the chat or in the Q&A. And I've seen a number of questions kind of specific to working with students and specific to working with schools. So the first one is around school districts don't want to share their data. If they're okay taking the survey, but then they don't want that data shared. What's a way that you have, or you would recommend that folks kind of work with schools to find ways to make sure that that data gets into hands that can respond and can use it well?
Mhm. Yeah, well, what I always like to say is that if the school is not willing to share the data, then only the school can be involved in that solution. They're the only ones who are informed about the data and who have that to help them figure out what is going on. If they share the data, then they can bring more people into um, the piece around interpretation and solving problems and determining strategies and things like that. And so they don't have to own all of it on their own if they are able to bring people in. I've seen in some surveys I've worked on, people initially, they don't want to share the data. And then when they take the step the next year and they share data, they realize how important it is to share it, to discuss it, to involve people in problem solving. And I've never once heard of a negative experience that a school has said, oh, I wish I didn't share the data. I shouldn't have done that. If anything, they say, oh, I should have been doing this sooner.
Mhm.
So I think really helping them understand that it's not about, it's not going to make their school look bad. These are community-wide issues. It's going to make their school actually look better because the school is being honest about what's happening in the school, and wanting help in discussing what strategies to employ.
That's great, Sherry. Thanks for sharing that. One of the things I've experienced in my surveying is that it helped us when we were doing a school survey to explain um, the 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 policies we put in place with our partners and the folks in our agencies who would be seeing that data. So we had a data use agreement that we had all of our coalition members and all of our um, staff who were going to be using that understand that policy and then sign it to say that they wouldn't share it in this way or that they wouldn't, would only go through specific channels. And that was really helpful for schools to understand what we would be doing with it and the lengths that we were going to protect their data
Mhm.
and communicate it effectively and appropriately. So that's another to think about is how can you share that or put those in place to create some trust and some understanding around how it will be shared among your folks, your partners, as well as the school.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
you don't want it to be a free-for-all where everybody just looks at the data and starts to misinterpret it and
Mhm.
share it
Yeah,
wildly. But yeah, if your school is nervous about it, then I think that's a great way to start with just some, start with a small group of people, share it with them, make sure there are agreements in place. So, absolutely.
great. Um, so one of the questions that we also got that I want to make sure we address with you, Sherry, is someone asked if skipping questions could result in skewing the results of the survey. So I think that might be about taking questions out or having individuals skip questions. So I wonder if you had any ideas that you'd share about if that's an issue.
Mhm. Typically it's not an issue because not everybody is skipping the same question. If everyone was going to skip the same question, yes, you'd have a lower response there, and then you would feel less confident that data was representing your student body. But I have never seen something like that happen. There are questions that kids skip, but they tend to be different because every kid is different. They might want to answer a question that another student wouldn't want to answer. And then the other thing is that if you force them to answer questions, they might not tell the truth anyways. That's a situation where they start to think, oh no, now this is no longer voluntary. And so that's when I start to have questions about the data. So I would rather that a student opts out on a particular question rather than feels forced to give an answer that they're uncomfortable giving.
And so I want to follow up with something specific because I know when community level parental providers might be out um, recruiting schools, we might have one school district who says, I don't want to ask question A, and another school says, I don't want to ask question B. And so at a state level or a county level, if we have schools or school districts choosing to opt out and not ask the question of their students, does that start to create concerns um, about the accuracy of the data?
No, it should not lead to any concerns about the accuracy. It might, there might be different thoughts and feelings about the survey. If an identity question is asked and a student feels like um, they're not able to identify who they are in the survey the way that they want to. But in generally, it will not affect the accuracy, but it will affect the information, that you do get in terms of the information that you learn from the survey, I think. So.
Great.
And I think
That's
it's
real
hard, you want to keep those questions in, but you don't that you feel are important, but you also don't want the opposition to become so great that nobody's taking the survey. So it's a balancing act.
great. Thank you. And then there's another question that we'll take quickly. The other questions that I'm seeing, just to clarify for folks, the other questions I'm seeing in the Q&A, I'm actually going to hold until we have our folks from the field to also address those. But there was one that I wanted to ask, and I think, sure, you kind of got to it a little bit, which was someone asked, is the title of the survey sometimes influential in people's reaction, right? So are there tips for kind of wording the title or the way that you share the type of survey that you're doing that might eliminate resistance? So the example was, what if you using survey versus assessment? I know you mentioned you want to not confuse a screener with a survey. Do you have any thoughts on, the wording or the way that the title is presented?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, but now I am thinking about it. I think the key is for it to be straightforward, for it not to look like you're hiding anything, that you call it like a, a guide. Yeah, I don't know what it would be, what you would say, but that it really is a survey, that it's related to health. And I think that those are all really important. It's related to health and youth, but I just think you want to be straightforward and describe it as it is, would be my suggestion. But if there's something that you can add around the organization that is sponsoring it, and add that to the cover of the survey, so that they can see, oh, this is a known, recognized, organization that is supporting this work. That's also really helpful.
Great, thank you. And then one last question came in and just about skipping, allowing students to skip individual questions. So the question is allowing skipping versus making required recommendations, required questions, is it recommended to create a safe space so that youth will feel more comfortable answering the survey? And I think you kind of got to that, but I just thought we'd directly address.
Mhm. Yeah, so I personally, in the surveys that I do, our institutional review board would not allow us to require responses to any questions on the survey, to make sure that each response is a voluntary response that the student is choosing to share. Is that what you're talking about, Erin, in terms of like required questions versus?
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
was the question really around allowing individual students to make those decisions. And does that create, is that important to creating a space where they feel comfortable engaging in the rest of the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely, if it feels voluntary, and they have some autonomy in terms of what information they decide to share or not to share, that's really important in helping them realize that their privacy will be protected, that the survey results will be honest, and, can really be used in positive ways.
Great, thank you. And like I said, I think the other questions that I see coming in, we hopefully will be able to address with both Sherry and our panel of presenters. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And we're going to just move into a section. We wanted to bring to you some some of your colleagues, some folks who are working in the field to share what's worked for them. So this is a problem, this is an issue that's happening across the country and in different types of communities and different places. And we know that there are people who've had great successes. We know people who are facing similar challenges. So we wanted to bring those folks in. So I'm really excited and I'm happy to have three folks today who've agreed to share about their survey and their experiences. So first we have Carol, who is from Michigan, who's going to share about the work that her community coalition has done. We have Kelly, who's joining us from South Dakota and will share her experiences. And finally, we have also Heidi from Utah, who will be sharing about, and Heidi serves at the state level. So she has information about how they provide support and direction to the communities in their state in Utah. And so, so we're excited to have them here. As we go through this, please continue to put questions in the Q&A section. And as you do that, I'll make sure that if it needs to be addressed immediately to the current presenter, or if we can hold it to the end and we'll have time to do a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Carol. And like I said, our presenters are going to share with us successes, challenges, a little bit about who they are and where they're from, but also successes, challenges, and strategies they've used. So without further ado.
I am here. Are we ready?
Yes.
Fantastic. Wonderful to be here. As Erin said, I'm in Michigan. I have been doing this work for over 16 years at Birmingham Bloomfield Community Coalition. We are a larger coalition that we're actually celebrating our 30-year anniversary this year. And we have been doing survey work since 2005. That was the first year we received the Drug-Free Communities grant. And it's a self-designed survey. And we have two extremely large school districts because really we could probably split up and be two separate coalitions. However, our communities work together in the way they do, so we're just rolling with the way it is. We have always done the survey since 2005, every other year. We did not start having a problem until it was in 2022, just after the world went sideways. And normally seriously, I would just email the principals and let them know once again, we're doing the survey again, first 2 full weeks in December. We always do the same time for both districts, and was going along as planned. We were in survey administration mode, and I got an email from one of the principals who ended up escalating it up to their administration. And it was because parents started complaining. And it wasn't a lot. It was the year that parents started complaining about all surveys, and they had high concerns about it. So that was one school district. I had to work really, really hard to make sure that we were able to complete survey administration, and to really just work with the deputy superintendent, and just so we could finish that one up. And then, we ended up started looking at other strategies along the way. One of the things we noticed, and it really hit, it was in 2023. First thing in the morning, I get a call from one of our middle schools, and the 7th graders, they weren't normally our surveys. We've been doing them for so long. We know it. We average about 18 minutes for the survey. Well, they were 30 plus minutes, and these 7th graders were still really struggling trying to get through the questions. So one of the things that has come up since the world went sideways is our students are developmentally stunted. So we realized that we were going to need to really start adjusting the survey, and really we scrutinized and we brought the survey length down, because that's the last thing we want to do with these great community partners that we've had, is to be a thorn in their side and to be negative, something negative in terms of the teachers who are so kind to be administering these surveys. So we did. So it was one of the solutions, and we took it upon ourselves. Everything we have done, we have been very proactive. We tried to not wait until the district came to us. We tried to really anticipate what was going on in the environment. And our survey team, we spent so much time just really going through things. And of course, we ended up, we did get both parents and students starting in 2022, started questioning their anonymity. Are you collecting IP addresses? And also the Facebook groups really of parents really kind of went on fire in terms of it would almost get a little bit out of control. We weren't in there, but we were hearing from parents who are advocates of ours. And so once again, we really, we ended up actually doing more presentations about the survey. We broke it down and ended up presenting so that they would understand, here are the 9 categories of questions we ask. And here are examples of the questions that are in these categories, and this is how we use them. So we did that. We also did that because at the same time, I don't know if this has happened to anyone else, we also had a lot of turnover, superintendent, deputy superintendent. We even in one of the districts, quite a few people on that whole executive level team were new. So we were no longer a known group who has been partnering for years. And I ended up going in and needing to do not only presentations to the cabinet, but presentations to the PTOC council, to the administrators. And there was a lot going on in terms of just really getting their questions answered, being that level of transparent. We also were getting objections in terms of parents because of those different demographic type questions that we were geared to be asking. So we adjusted. As a matter of fact, we had a separate survey for the middle school that would only ask certain demographic questions. And then the high school would have a different one. And we always work with both of our school partners in terms of what would you feel most comfortable with. We are more than happy to accommodate you. Because the whole thing is you want to make sure the survey continues on in the school. So once again, we took it upon ourselves and just really bent over backwards and did whatever we could that we would be able to maintain the integrity of our survey instrument. We also, in terms of the objections with the parents, once again, we ended up, made sure that we were available. We would, make sure that if they had any questions, we would ask, make sure they could connect with us. And then once again, just really educating in terms of the value of the survey, the results that we get, how this really is a snapshot in time for our students, and this is why this benefits them. Any questions or anything that I did not cover, Erin?
I think you did a great job. We did have one question really specific to you, and that is, do you use the Michigan Youth Survey, the state survey, or you're just using that? Okay,
We
great.
use our own self-designed survey. The other thing that we did do, our own self-designed survey, because we have the raw data, so we're able to do cross tabulations and do those beautiful correlations. Because what we do is we have a youth action board, a group of high school teens. So whenever we hear something being talked about at the table, we put it in the survey. And so that's how we handle that.
Great. So that gives you some freedom to make changes to your survey. There was a question. It's my understanding that you're in a largely suburban area. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
So as we hear from other folks, we kind of listen to one of the questions here is, are there differences between rural and suburban areas or urban areas? So as we kind of listen, we'll keep ears out for that, both our other presenters as well. So thanks for that question. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and continue. Thank you, Carol. We're going to go on to our next presenter. Our next presenter who's going to share is Kelly Rumsa from South Dakota. And there we go. I see you now. Great. Kelly, I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about your work.
Great, thank you. As Erin introduced, I'm Kelly Rumsa. I work at our Regional Behavioral Health Center. We're located in the northeast corner of South Dakota. And so with our community, I've been doing facilitating prevention efforts for over 25 years. We have coalition-based efforts as well as school-based efforts. And just to give you a little idea of what our community is made of, we are rural, highly blue collar community. Our middle school is grades 7 and 8, which is about 600 students. And then our public high school is 9 through 12 with about 1,200 students. And then we do have a couple private schools within our community. But primarily we focus on our public schools because that's who allows us to come in and survey. But the data still benefits our whole community at large. For us, I've been very fortunate. Like I said, I've been doing prevention for over 25 years, and our school district has been very supportive of that data collection. So prior to me starting in my position, actually our school district has been doing surveying since 1996. So yes, back in the 1900s. We always kind of joke about that a little bit. But that came as a result of concerned community members. We're seeing some trends, had some concerns with the youth in the community. Took action with our school district, school board to do strategic planning, and they determined that an outside survey was going to help best look at what issues and concerns are impacting our youth. So our community actually started utilizing Search Institute's profiles of student life, looking at the 40 developmental assets. And so with that data, it just helped them look at what's going on with our community right here, right now. It helped with school district planning. It also helped with community-based planning too. So it was very collaborative effort. And so typically we survey every other year. We transitioned from Search Institute to Pride Youth Surveys, which is another national survey through International Survey Associates in Georgia. Just with how we wanted to collect more different types of data. So that was going to be a better fit, and it aligned a little bit better with our state, who also utilizes the youth risk behavior survey. So then we could look at our local data points and then comparing it to state points and then national points. And so that was kind of our reasoning for that transition of the surveys. I guess our challenges came in 2014. That's when our state made amendment to the law in regards of administering surveys to our students in the state. And so we went from passive to active consent. And so that impacted a lot of our schools participating not only in our state youth risk behavior survey and then local surveys that a lot of our prevention cohorts did. And so at the state level, our program manager had helped us bring this bill when it came to our attention and wanted us to work with our local school districts for their interpretation. I believe with our relationship that we had with our school district and able to have communication, I shared that language with our administration at that time to get their interpretation of that law. And so with our school district, you know, interpreting the law with their lawyer, they determined that the language in that law was primarily factored if it was any state survey that filtered down into our school district. And with our survey that we do with our students is a voluntary survey. We express that in any of the information that we send out to parents, to students, to the community. And so we just followed that same suit with the letters that we get sent out to parents that this is a survey that we've been doing with students since 1996. It helps us collect data, getting their input of behaviors that are impacting them or the perceptions that they have, which then in reflective helps with helping to make our community a healthier and safe place. And that's how we've always expressed it. The school provides us with the location and the opportunity to gain input from our students. And we also communicate with our community at large that the student data is just one piece of the data that we collect. We also look at, you know, local arrest data. We look at community perception surveys that we do with our local hospital so that they get that this is a piece of part of our community's efforts in making our community a healthy and safe place. And that's how we emphasize it. One challenge that we did have though, when we transitioned from Search Institute to Pride surveys is we never hear anything up to when we do the survey. It's always after, but in our language and our letters to our schools, we have the survey available for anybody to look at in our admin's office. So parents have that right to look at that. It's usually afterwards when our students take the survey, they may come home and say, hey, we took the survey today, you know, so then we get some calls from parents then saying, you know, we didn't know. And then that's when we just validate and say, remember, you got this sent home at conferences, you got this letter sent home, you know, expressing all of that. And so usually when you have those conversations with parents, then they understand. Some parents with the language of the survey, the question was, do you change the survey titles and things like that? The survey that we administer is called Pride Surveys. And so, you know, with the trends and things like that, people were like, oh, you're asking a Pride survey. And we just clarified that and that, no, this is the name of the survey is Pride Survey. So once that was communicated, it's just taking that time to answer those questions and to be open and to know that we work with this on a regular basis. So when you're a parent, you know, not as familiar with this language or with the surveys, just taking that time to communicate with them. I'm just trying to see if I'm hitting everything what I need to. With Pride Survey that we do, it also allows for us to add additional questions. So if there are current trends or issues that we are seeing in our community, we do add those type of questions to that survey so that we are meeting the needs, because there are some questions that maybe aren't reflective in that survey. And then we can add those questions as well. And then once the survey comes back, it is the school's data. They are allowing our coalition to utilize that data as well. We don't have a written consent or things like that to share that information. It's all verbal. We have our meetings where everybody who's sharing that information sits around at the table. We meet with the school district, review that data with them, and they help guide us how to approach it. We present then to our school board, and then once that information is shared with our school board, then we have that permission to share that information within the community to different groups and things like that. But again, we emphasize the purpose of our surveys is not to point or to blame fingers at anybody. This is to help us to spark questions and conversations to look at why are our students responding this way. What is going on in our community that might be reflective back on those, and how do we make those shifts and changes to meet the needs of our students? We also look at the data at our programming. Are we effective? Are we addressing the needs of our students? Or what changes and things do we need to be making in that? So we are very open with our communication with our surveying.
Great. Kelly, it sounds like you guys are doing amazing work, and I've spent a lot of time building relationships in the community and sharing. And so there's a lot of peer sharing kind of going on in the chat, which is wonderful. Kind of keep going. I love to see that. I'm going to hold questions right now so we can hear from Heidi from Utah. But
All right.
Kelly, thank you so much for sharing
you.
about your work. So we're going to go ahead and invite. Oh, let me go. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Oh, nope. Can't find you. Let's see. There you go, Heidi. I'm going to just spotlight you so everyone can see your lovely face. There we go. Heidi, if you want to share with us, and again, Heidi comes from a slightly different angle as she works at the state and regional level in her state of Utah. So I'm going to turn over to you, Heidi.
Great. Thank you, Erin. I so appreciate this opportunity and the great collaborative that this is. I don't know about all of you, but it's just great as some of these things are talked about and that we recognize that these are challenges that we share and we can come together and talk about these, find these super helpful. So thank you for the information that's been shared today. Again, like we have had some of these similar challenges. Our survey here in the state of Utah is called the SHARP survey. You can see I'm so passionate about this. I even have it on my background all the time, encouraging people to stay sharp and know the truth about what this survey is. Our survey includes the YRBS as well as our student youth prevention needs assessment, where we assess for risk and protective factors, ask about substances, and then other general health department questions. And this SHARP kind of became an umbrella survey project, if you will, because we wanted to minimize the impact and over surveying that was happening in the schools, which of course makes schools resistant and can lower the buy-in overall that we had. In terms of participation, it's quite similar to what others have shared. We found that after the COVID pandemic, there really was a lapse. We kind of hit our peak numbers in 2019. We've been delivering our survey since 2003, so a long history. And throughout the entirety of Utah's survey, we have had an active consent process. So parents need to actively say yes, and we have that at the parent level, at the school level, at the district level, and then of course students also need to opt in, and we let students know through a proctor video and or language at the beginning that any question that they don't feel comfortable in answering, that they're able to skip that question. So our rates in 2019, our all-time high was just over 86,000 surveys. In 2021, those dipped a bit after COVID for understandable reasons, down to 71,000. But then in 2023, we found these were declining even more. Our rate went down to 51,000. And we really, in essence, had to fight to keep SHARP alive. We found that some of the parenting groups, and really what this came down to, one of my favorite quotes is change happens at the speed of trust. And we were having a survey crisis, and our summation of that was really, it was a trust crisis with the survey and what it means. So we got together with our communications department, who's been a great champion for us in this effort, and decided that first of all, we needed to do a focus group and really understand from our community, from our parents, what were their concerns about this survey. And we went into this very open-minded, really preparing for the worst, that they're going to come back with many of these concerns that were voiced by Sherry. We were surprised to find that a strong majority of the parents really did want their kids to be asked these questions. They had more trust at the local level and at the state level than at the federal level. So we found that having local conversations and local trust was really important in that project. And we also found that we could rely on kind of 3 pillars. First of all, that youth voice is powerful, and our survey gives teens a voice and allows us to listen to what they say so that we can have impact and respond proactively to what those concerns are. Our SHARP survey helps us to understand what teens think, what they feel, and what they experience. And then also our SHARP survey provides parents, families, schools, and community leaders with information that we just can't get anywhere else. And because of this, we feel like SHARP is critical to have in our states. Part of our communication campaign, we just really wanted to hit hard what SHARP is. And so some of those things that we've really hit home is SHARP is confidential. It's voluntary. SHARP is not harmful. It's easy to access. It's transparent. It's valid. And it's free. A lot of times there's misperceptions out there that SHARP is costly. And again, Sherry went over some of these things. So we really hit this hard. We were also able to launch a website where we showed that we were willing to be very transparent. I just put a link to this website in the chat. Their parents can have access to the data reports, again, that are aggregated, and they are on a local, an LSAA level. Schools have control over who sees their data in smaller communities. But that way they have access to that. They have full access to what the questions are. And then we have a very extensive FAQ page, as well as resource pages there where communities can access a PowerPoint that they can customize for their community and do SHARP presentations to help educate. Just with this past administration, we're actually delivering our SHARP survey right now, kind of between January and May is when our 2025 administration is happening. Leading up to this, we had little pockets bubble up and some of them were communities that have always opted in. We've never had to worry. And all of a sudden, somebody on the school board or a parent group came up and, ran some interference. And we would hear like, oh, they might not participate this year. Because we had these tools ready and available, our communities were able to access them, plug in local information, go have lunch with a local key leader, go do a presentation at a local school board meeting, bring youth in to help advocate. And in most of these situations, we were able to get administration back online for 2025. So we have seen these tools make a great difference in our state. Again, feel free to check out that website. Some of the deliverables that we've worked on, like I said, was a new website. We produce brochures and other printables. We're even able to print some collateral items. We have these clear tote bags that have been really popular. It says SHARP is totes awesome. So again, these kind of becomes tools of the trade when you're a prevention specialist and you're out in the community or at a school back to school night or something like that. We have updated forms with new branding so that the materials are appealing. And then we've recently just released a social media package, both for Facebook and size for Instagram, so that local community coalitions can get that information out. Other materials we're working on is a parent-facing video that can go on our website, as well as social media. And then we're really working with our reporting work group to have a parent-facing report. We get really good, like in Health and Human Services, in reading our very maybe more techie, high-level reports that can be really overwhelming to just the general population and to parents. So we're really working to prioritize what information from this survey can we extract, give to parents in a very easy to read format, so that they can find SHARP to be a useful tool for them. And again, ultimately to increase the public's trust for what SHARP does and how it helps them as parents, and ultimately in communities and for our state.
Heidi, this is remarkable and really useful information. So thank you. And that perspective from the state level of the difference between the trust at the state level and at the local level is helpful, especially as folks at the local level are thinking about how they can be more impactful. For those of you who have a state level funder who's supporting your prevention work, or for those of you who are doing local surveys, I think a lot of what Heidi has shared could be applicable for you. For those of you who are doing a state specific survey, go to your funder and ask about these kinds of things, or these things that your youth survey provider can support in providing you or help you develop. So lots of support out there. And what I'd like to do now is just take a few minutes, and I'm gonna just put all y'all, let's see if we can get all of you on our screens here, all of our presenters. There we go. I do have some questions in the Q&A. So if you've asked a question in the chat, there's like very little chance I'm gonna be able to get there. So please put them in there. And then it looks like we're gonna go ahead and start with questions, but it looks like Carol has something to add.
I noticed that I neglected addressing the paper survey. The
Oh,
reason,
thank you.
there was two things I did not address. One, the last 2 years, we've had to dramatically shorten our survey to be able to get it into the schools. And also we're getting a lot of survey fatigue from the students. But the reason we went to a paper survey, which we're not going to do again, is we just wanted to see if maybe the students would feel more comfortable answering those substance use questions, honestly. Mental health questions, and we've done student interviews. They feel very comfortable sharing on that, but the substance use, for whatever reason, our data doesn't fully match what we are seeing. So this was a one-time thing. We're not going to do that again because it's a Herculean effort to have to enter all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's helpful and useful, as we know that one of the things that people are concerned about is privacy in those online surveys. That's really helpful to hear that that's something you're not going to be going back to, but that you tried. So thank you for sharing that. I have a number of questions that I want to try to get to. Let's see if I can get back up to the top. One of the questions was around materials or information that you can provide to students. I know we talked a lot about information for and supporting school administrators, teachers, and parents, but if anyone has specific materials or information that they've found successful in sharing with students, is there something? Yep, Carol?
What we do is we actually incorporate our data results into some of the programming we bring into schools. So for example, we have this teen transition program for 8th graders, and we have these clickers, so it's interactive, and we'll put up, this is your data. And so we'll align the questions like, how many students do you think in high school reported using alcohol? And, they'll put like 80 some percent, 90% or whatever. Well, actually, no, it's only this amount. And so we incorporate it right in there to help work with those perceptions that we know can really take our students down the wrong path.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yep, we do
Heidi, I
similar.
also, oh, go ahead,
Kelly?
Kelly.
I was just gonna
Kelly,
say,
go
we
ahead.
do this, we do the same in our advisories, so it's a shorter class period. We develop like a a survey questionnaire type of thing, and then they fill it out either, and then we kind of make it a contest too, so then they can win prizes and things. So it engages them a little bit more and sparks that conversation. And then we have the fact sheets then that teachers have that will then process it a little bit more with the students too.
Great. Heidi?
In addition to that, I just love to add like the real influence that youth coalitions can have when they're working towards better substance use and mental health outcomes in their specific schools. They can become real advocates for this data, and then of course understand the process behind it. Like, okay, once we have this data, how do we interpret it? How do we find where we're at risk? And then what's our action plan? Based on the data. So it really helps them in a powerful way to be proactive in creating change in their schools.
That's all very, very helpful. And I just want to acknowledge that there's, there's a number of great questions in here. We're probably not going to get to all of them, but we will try to find ways to address them after if possible. But one of the questions that I want to make sure we get to, and I think a few of you could probably help us understand, is how do you address concerns in small rural communities and get them to want to take a survey when small school results and numbers are often suppressed?
So for our community, what we do, I mean, we're still considered a bigger school in our area where we do have that population. But what we do is if numbers are smaller than what we want, we'll put them into the next grade level. So say our responses for 7th and 8th grade are too small, we'll put them all together as middle school data so that we are there aren't any identifying factors maybe that people could figure out who's responding to what. But we do try to emphasize that, or we won't share that data point if the responses are lower, or we feel that we're not comfortable in sharing that because we don't have the responses to cover for it. And again, I probably didn't emphasize it, so I'm going to take this opportunity to emphasize it then. With our surveys, it is totally 100% voluntary, and we emphasize that with all of our information with the students, with the parents and things like that. So it's their choice. So we're always concerned if we're going to get the responses that we do. But for the most part, our response rates haven't changed since we've seen that shift with our law. And I think it's just that communication with smaller rural communities. I feel like if you can have those conversations with parents to understand the importance of that information, they're more likely to participate in with their students with that.
Great, that's really helpful. Heidi, do you have any thoughts about rural communities, or I know you have a
Yeah.
mix of communities in Utah?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Kelly said. I think in addition to that is just educating some of the why behind that. Like Kelly said, number one, student privacy is of the utmost importance. And yes, we value transparency of our data, but we value confidentiality more. So I think if you can help them understand that it's really not in an effort to hide anything, that we do want to be as transparent as possible, but we do want to protect our students, and just sometimes helping them connect the values that we hold and that we're protecting can be helpful again in earning that trust for the survey, and that can minimize some of the uptightness that sometimes they feel when they can't have this data. Was that understated?
Yeah, thank you. The overwhelming thing that I hear is it's about relationships, it's about building trust, and it's about communicating, and that's for students, parents, and schools. So, I think if there's one takeaway, I think that's what we're hearing is building trust and building relationships, communicating well and in advance. There are a number of other questions that I'm going to try to get answered after. That are great questions, but I want to make sure that we can continue to move on. I want to thank our panelists for being here and spending that time with us. But I also want to, I want to go back and kind of do a little bit of wrap up and talk about, oops, and talk about Great, we did that. So thinking about next steps, one of the things that's helpful to think about is when you kind of absorb all this information, is to think about in the next week what you might do. So when you think about in the next week some of the things that you could do to build support for the youth survey, some of the actions we've put here include review survey administration practices, create a document, a Q&A document or an FAQ, generate a list of positive changes. So identify that work that's been done that's come directly out of your survey, schedule meetings. So again, start those conversations or discuss strategies identified in this webinar with a colleague. So, kind of a water cooler chat, like someone who can share some of this information with. And so we're going to put up a poll and ask you guys to think about that and say, what are you going to do? So thinking about those answers, what are you going to do in the next week? And there's also an option for other. And if you want to like write in what you might do if something is other than what you're going to do.
So other write-in is the second question. It's a short answer if you want to provide that.
Thank you for that clarification. So we see discuss with colleagues seems to be what people are most focusing on in the next week. Understandable. I think getting folks on board and being able to chat with them is really helpful. So great. So can we go ahead and publish the, thank you. Great. So again, what we're seeing is, taking that time to discuss with your colleagues. It's a great way to think about how you can apply this information. So thanks guys for taking that time to think about what's next for you. And I wanna, we have had questions about asking our presenters to share their information, their contact information, and we will, oops. We will get that for you, hopefully in a follow-up email. And again, answer some of those questions that we may not have gotten to. So I'm going to turn it over. Again, I want to thank Sherry, Heidi, Kelly, Carol. Thank you so much for taking your time today. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris to help us wrap up and hear about what's next coming at the PTTC.
Great. Thank you so much to you all, as well as the participants. There's great information sharing in the chat, as Erin mentioned. And we will do our best with those questions we weren't able to get answered during the session. We will see what we can do with writing up the responses, and we'll send those out to you via email. So please know we'll do our best to answer those. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to let you know about some upcoming opportunities for you all. If you are interested in just quick 15-minute networking with fellow preventionists, please join us. We have 3 more of our networking breaks coming up. You're welcome to join in 1, 2, or all 3 of those. We have one last deep dive into our prevention code of ethics until 2027. So if you are needing continuing education for your certification as a prevention specialist, join us then. If you are a supervisor of preventionists, of substance misuse prevention professionals, or you have a supervisor who might be interested in this training, please have them join us for March 11th and 13th for a training with Nicole Augustine. On March 20th, we are going to have an impactful advocacy for substance misuse prevention webinar with some great hands-on tools that you'll be able to use to help you advocate for substance misuse prevention. In April, we are going to hold our sustainability planning intensive training course. So if you are ready to have a deep dive into sustainability planning, I highly encourage you to submit an application for that. A priority will be given to those folks in our region, in the Great Lakes region. If you're outside our region, you can put in an application, but we'll only be able to take you if we have space in the end. And last but not least, and there are other things coming up, but what we have open for registration right now is telling stories with data. So looking at data visualization. This is a webinar by Brian Kloss from Johns Hopkins. He has done several other trainings for us. He's amazing. Highly recommend that you join us for that webinar. If you haven't already, we'd love to have you follow us on LinkedIn and our Facebook. If you do social media, we post every business day on there to get information out to you for what
we hope will be helpful for you in your work as a substance misuse prevention professional. Last but not least, just a reminder to please take a few minutes to complete the GIPRA evaluation form. When this webinar closes out, you'll be redirected to the form. This is super helpful for us to with future planning, as well as, of course, reporting to our funders. And as I always say, please know this: the what you write does not go into a black hole. I read every comment and make sure that we think and really consider everything, all the feedback that you give us. So it's worth your time to do it, I hope. And with that, I am going to check in. Rebecca or Erin, any last thoughts before we log off?
Nope, just thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to hear from you.
All right, everyone have a great rest of your day. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.